and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee-Ji-yoon in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check of today's highlights. Korea's output for all industries rebounded in May, doing better than expected as automobile and semiconductor production boosted activity. It's already the last day of June, and as Korea heads into the second half of 2016, we take a look at what problems the economy has faced so far and what lies ahead in the remaining half of the year. We start with some positive news for the local economy today. Korea's output across all industries rose at the fastest pace in 15 months. But we don't know for sure whether this upward trend will continue. Our Kim Hye-sung with the numbers.
Korea's output across all industries rose 1.7% in May from the previous month, posting a turnaround from the near 1% drop logged in April. This also marks the biggest rise in 15 months. Statistics Korea says May's output figure was led by stronger industrial production in the mining and manufacturing sectors that rose 2.5%. In particular, semiconductor and auto output saw some impressive gains on the back of improving export conditions. The pace of decline in Korea's exports slowed in May, dropping 6% from the same period a year earlier after it plunged over 10% in April. Outbound shipments had mostly recorded double-digit declines for nearly a year and a half. The finance ministry, however, cautioned against too much optimism, saying the rebound came on the back of a low base effect seen in April. It added more data should be reviewed to determine whether the upward trend will persist, as Britain's decision to leave the European Union is forecast to have a negative impact on Korea's exports. The ministry also said the consumption tax cut on automobiles that ends this month will put a dent in retail sales that rose over 0.5% in May from the previous month. Kim Hye-sung, Business Daily.
Korea has designated the shipbuilding industry as a sector to receive special state support in the face of widely expected massive layoffs due to the ongoing corporate restructuring drive. The government, however, has excluded the country's top 3 shipbuilders from receiving related benefits. Let's hear what the labor minister had to say about this.
Major shipbuilders still have a certain amount left in terms of order backlogs, meaning there's room to maintain employment. Most smaller firms are in court receivership or discussing self-rescue plans. So relatively speaking, operational conditions at the big 3 are in better shape.
And pundits say this decision might have come to pressure the top 3 companies to come up with voluntary restructuring plans. The support measures for roughly 7,800 firms will include providing funds so that firms can keep their workers for longer stretches and pay overdue wages. Shipbuilding is the first sector to be designated a special employment support industry by the government after the country introduced the system last year. Korea Offshore Ship and Shipbuilding Association expects up to 63,000 workers in the industry to lose their jobs by the end of next year. President Park Geun-hye dropped by a town committed to environmentally friendly practices as part of her efforts to see how the government's policies are being implemented in the field. Hongcheon in Gangwon-do province, known as Korea's first eco-city, uses methane gas produced from animal manure and food waste processing to generate electricity from small hydraulic and solar panels. President Park launched the Eco-City initiative back in 2014 to counter climate change and foster new industries in the energy sector. It's also aimed at lowering electricity fees to lighten the burden on households. The government has so far selected 19 counties to designate as eco-cities. The free trade agreement between Korea and the United States has helped significantly increase American exports, according to a report by the U.S. International Trade Commission. It said the FTA has boosted total U.S. outbound trade by roughly $4.8 billion to $5.3 billion U.S. That would make the trade pact with Korea the second largest contributor to U.S. trade among the 13 FTAs that Washington has ratified. Top is the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which increased U.S. exports by as much as $126 billion. The report contradicts claims made by presumptive Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, who argues that NAFTA and other trade deals have widened America's trade deficit. And as the world tries to still digest Britain's surprise decision to leave the European Union, Korea's small and medium-sized export companies are taking stock of their future operations in Europe. You might expect them to be in a gloomy mood, but the majority of them are actually feeling pretty confident. Our Oh Soo-young has the story.
Small and medium-sized consumer product businesses in Korea are keeping calm and carrying on amid the Brexit fallout. For more than 22 years, this food supplier has been exporting Korean food and snacks to European countries, including the UK and the Netherlands. While the Brexit decision initially raised some eyebrows, this company doesn't plan on cutting its shipments.
Our company largely goes through the European market, so reducing our exports is out of the question. We'll keep a close eye on what happens over the next 2 years.
It's also business as usual for a medical equipment company, although it worries tariffs will change in 2 years from now.
We expect there will be various ramifications in terms of FDA tariffs and exchange rates, but our exports to Europe will continue as normal.
In fact, consumer product companies are keeping positive as a whole, seeking new opportunities abroad despite a protracted slump in exports and uncertainty surrounding Brexit. An expo for consumer good exporters almost tripled in size compared to last year, with more than 1,600 companies taking part and 550 buyers coming from abroad.
I think an original idea that offers convenience has plenty of potential for overseas markets.
Even amid the global recession, exports of major consumer product categories, cosmetics, fashion, food, medicine and household goods, grew around 8% in the first half of this year, compared to the year before. And there's room for more improvement.
If companies actively respond to the crisis with new business methods like electronic transactions, I think our exports may recover.
Experts say business prospects largely depend on how companies fare through the current global uncertainties, improving their product quality and competitiveness, and turning crises into opportunities. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
Today is the last day of June, meaning the first half of the year has come to an end. With that, we're going to take a look at how the Korean economy has been performing since the new year and what tasks lie ahead as global economic conditions continue to look unpromising.
How did the Korean economy do in the first half of this year? To that question, over 75% of the 1,000 economists, businessmen and financial experts surveyed by the Finance Ministry said it was doing worse than last year. The Korean economy has continued to struggle with lackluster growth in the face of continually sliding exports and tepid demand amid the slowing global economy. On top of that, the government has kicked off its aggressive corporate restructuring drive, focused on reforming the country's ailing shipping and shipbuilding industries to cut back on oversupply. But there are concerns about these efforts as they're poised to produce massive layoffs. On top of this, on the global front, Britain's decision to exit the European Union, as well as the remaining possibility of a rate hike by the US Federal Reserve, add insult to injury. What kind of strong measures does the Korean economy need to pull out in the second half to weather the storm? Let's find out.
And to tell us more about this, we have Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joining us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Pleasure to be here.
So just this week, the finance minister cut its GDP growth forecast to 2.8% from 3.1%. Now, what does this downward revision say about the Korean economy in the first half of the year?
Well, the Korean economy is slowing down just a little bit in the first half of this year. And that has been much driven by decreased investment and decreased export. And in the last year, in the second half of the year, the economic growth rate was about 3.1%, but that has been decreased down to 2.6% in the first half of this year. And we have serious decrease in export, over 10% in annual basis. And the investment, the purchase of the capital goods by corporations also decreased over 4%.
Now, what about domestic demand? How has this been doing?
Well, out of many components of the GDP, the domestic consumption is the only part that is not decreasing. The quarterly increase of the domestic consumption was 2.2% higher than that of the last year. And that has been much affected by tax deduction, which is given by Korean government in the first half of this year. For example, the auto sales has been increased up to 10% compared to the last year.
Now, with an end to consumption tax benefits, though, the government is actually looking into implementing the so-called Happy Monday, which is to, I guess, let people have a 3-day weekend by moving some of the major holidays to a Monday. Do you think this will work to boost domestic consumption? And if there are any other ways that we could see a refueling of the domestic consumption?
Well, about the effects of the extended holidays, we have different effects over different industries. For example, for retail sales, we have huge positive impact for extended holidays. The department store sales increased up to 15% in the last May. And the movie theater sales increased up to 70%.
70? Wow.
And however, we have different effects in tour industry. That tour industry was thought as a main beneficiaries of extended holidays. But people increased their demand for overseas tours rather than the domestic tours.
So do you think there would be any other ways to, I guess, kind of turn that around?
Well, I believe that government has to reconsider extension of the tax deduction because that has a main effect according to our experience in the first half of the year. And I'd like to point out that the total tax revenue of the government has been increased instead, even though tax rate has been decreased. So that has a win-win policy for both of the consumers and the governments.
And I know you mentioned this a little bit before, but let's look at exports again. How have Korean exporters been doing so far this year?
Well, the export has a really bad shape because it is decreasing over the last almost 2.5 years.
Right.
But the good news is in May, the decreasing speed of the export has been lessened. The export decreasing rate was over 10% all of the year, but that decreasing rate became 6% thanks to increasing export to the United States, our second largest export partner. But the problem is export to China, our largest export partner. In the May, compared to the last year, the export to China has been decreased down to 9%.
Oh, all right. Well, and of course, a lot of the attention has been on Korea's shipping and shipbuilding industries because the government's aggressive restructuring efforts are ongoing right now. So what can we expect out of those? And what would, in the short term, I guess, what would be the ramifications?
Well, the government has a bailout plan and restructuring plan for shipping and shipbuilding industry. And it is scheduled that they will spend over 10 trillion Korean won on this matter. But the problem is the restructuring plan requires at least 30% reduction of the workforce. So there will be huge amount of the unemployment coming in the second half of the year. For example, top 3 shipbuilding companies hires more than 70,000 people. So if that bailout plan is executed as planned, there will be more than 20,000 people will lose their jobs.
Wow. All right. So, but then in the longer term, is it expected to help the shipbuilding and shipbuilding industries?
Exactly. In the long term, that should be increasing the competitiveness of the shipbuilding and shipping industry by clearing out marginal companies from the industry.
All right. Well, with hopes of, I guess, cushioning risks from those corporate restructuring drive, as well as the recent Brexit referendum that Britain is about to exit the European Union, the government announced this week that it plans to draw up a supplementary budget as a part of the larger stimulus fiscal package. So how is this expected to help boost the economy in the second half?
Well, the government's 10 trillion won size supplementary budget has been pretty much expected well before the Brexit decision. But the problem is the $10 trillion supplementary budget is not much related to the restructuring shipping and shipbuilding industry. So this is something preemptive action for avoiding further downturns of the Korean economy. And government is expecting there will be 0.2% increase of the GDP. But I'm kind of negative on that because in economic theory, we say that if there is no big difference between potential GDP and actual GDP, there is no effect on expansionary budget. And this is the situation of very narrowed actual and potential GDP.
Okay, well, aside from Brexit, we still have other things coming up, especially in the U.S. We could see a potential rate hike there, as well as a presidential election coming up in November. So what's your outlook on potential global risks?
Well, there are lots of uncertainties outside of the Korean economy in the second half of the year. For example, we have presidential election in the United States, Brexit, and U.S. Fed decision on interest rate. And moreover than that, we have slowing Chinese economy.
Right.
So I believe that all these together in aggregate will give a negative impact on Korean economy in the second half of the year. So therefore, the domestic consumers and domestic companies will fasten their belts further. Then that will be another internal factors to decrease the economy.
So what should be at the center of, I guess, Korea's financial authorities' minds when trying to come up with measures to boost the local economy?
Well, I believe that Korean government did well over a very difficult situation inside and outside. But it is time to decide on the size of the expansionary policy, like how much aggressive we should be doing on quantitative easing and how much another supplementary budget will be provided. That direction is not clear at all right now. So that direction should be clearly decided as soon as possible.
Let's hope to see clarity in that area soon. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.